please connect your computer. And in the meantime, I will just explain. So Beth is from Ocean Protocol. Ocean Protocol is one of Berlin's most famous blockchain projects, for sure. They've done a huge ICO a couple of years ago. So they are a well-financed blockchain startup here in Berlin. And their mission is kind of like this morning, with our presenter Thorsten, the reinvention of the data economy, but in this case I think with some potential also for lawyers. In fact, Beth was part of the hackathon and worked with a team from Linden Partners, a law firm, boutique law firm here in Berlin, to find a strategy how companies and law firms can do a due diligence on data in the merger and acquisition process without actually revealing the sensitive data about these companies. So a very real application that makes a lot of sense. And now Beth will just give us a more general understanding of the technology and the potential. And with this, Beth, I think I would love to ask you on stage. Your presentation will be ready in a second. In the meantime, just tell us 2 things about yourself. Thank you very much.
So yeah, my German is terrible, as you probably guessed from me not speaking in German. But yeah, so I do ecosystem development at Ocean Protocol, and what that means is a kind of intersection of user research, developer relations, community management, basically figuring out ways we can extend our protocol, which is open source software that I'll talk about a little bit more in the presentation. But I'm really interested in exploring legal as a vertical to add to the ones that we already are pretty well established, like logistics, supply chain, healthcare, all of these, more standard verticals for, wanting data exchanges and the tracking that blockchain enables. But I think that legal has some really interesting applications because of the data silos that prevent a lot of legal tech from being able to reach its full potential, and also the need for legally viable structures for actually managing the different ways of organizing that blockchain enables. So yeah, I'll talk a bit about these. So I guess in the talk earlier, you guys already heard a lot about the kind of Web3 ethos, but just to talk a little bit about, the spaces for blockchain ecosystems, Web2 is how we refer to, traditional kind of applications and websites like Facebook, Google, et cetera, that have really changed how we manage, share, derive value from data, and especially this perception of using people's data for ways that they did not intend, and while also having this enormous amount of financial return to individuals that are the disseminators of this data, but not necessarily the generators. So, as we will see in kind of this use case laid out for ways of organizing around data and buying and selling it, that this comes to be very important. Just brief, Web 1 to Web 3. Not to assault you with this entire thing, but with regards to how, these decentralized, distributed, user-managed ecosystems are a reaction to problems with data silos and vulnerability, then, we really seek to put forward methods of achieving data sovereignty, which is having autonomy over who uses your data, when it's used, and just in general, recentering decision-making about data with individuals generating it. And similarly with decentralized storage, it's like meaningless for the data to be truly held by only the individuals that generate it, without actually having, decentralizing the storage away from these service providers like Google, et cetera, because then, it's still possible to be vulnerable to breach and used in unintended ways. And, similarly with these other elements, Web3, this decentralized and distributed systems enabled by blockchain, make it so that we're able to explore things like decentralized finance, crypto economics, these ways of having new incentive structures that derive and distribute value in unique ways. Now getting to the part of where my company comes in and what I think can be very interesting for exploring legal forms. Data lies at the center of Web3 ecosystems because it's the tool, substrate, and conduit for mechanisms of control. And so what I mean by that, whoever controls the data controls, the money that is generated from it and the value created. There more data is aggregated and pooled and able to be processed all at once. Obviously, the more value it provides because you're able to make stronger models, better predictions, more extensible algorithms. So this idea of not only removing data from silos so that it is able to provide value back to users, the value also increases exponentially with the more data that's able to be used in algorithm construction. So, what we are interested in looking at Ocean, if we can create an open data economy that is directly tied to financial markets and is able to provide these new incentive structures, how does that actually work? So, we have this comparison that arises between I guess in the blockchain ethos in general, this idea of banks and kind of private holders and distributors of money being a shadow economy that then is opened up in the token economy. If you're familiar with philosophy of Bitcoiners, this is very much kind of what they are all about, which is trustless, permissioned, transfer of value in cryptocurrency. And so what we put forward is that there's an analogous shadow economy of data that's held and controlled by Google, Facebook, et cetera, but that can be opened up to individual consumers. So when we talk about data economy, it has two elements. Data commons, which is the actual infrastructure of shared and pooled data coming from all of these different sources and held and managed in the ways that they lay out, which is where legal comes in an interesting way. Similarly, that's is able to power data marketplaces where data is actually bought, sold, and exchanged. This is kind of what we're doing with Ocean, bringing algorithms and compute to data while providing an incentive structure for data sharing. Because if people are not incentivized to add their data to these systems where they actually have to make an effort to add it instead of just being mined or farmed by external organizations, then that you need to have incentives there. Also incentives for being a good actor, for providing these protections, et cetera. So, and as we construct this data economy, then there's 3 different frameworks that are used for opening data. So, for sharing, data commons, as I mentioned, for exchanging, data marketplaces that then inject liquidity into data as, conceptualized as an asset. And then finally, stewarding with data trust, which is, I think, where maybe this gets the most exciting for you guys. So data commons, if you're familiar with some of the work around data commons for law, then and this is focusing on making data commons for legal data itself, such as results of cases, regulations and standards and the outcomes that they end up creating throughout the ecosystem, contextual information that kind of informs predictive models about all of these things. Those can, I guess, be open to construct these data commons. So, collectively owned and managed by users themselves instead of, just being held in the court system. So yeah, yesterday at the hackathon, somebody was telling me a stat about, 90% of legal data or something is, in Germany is held by law firms, who are, very invested in holding on to this information. And so, that is something potentially controversial, but maybe also interesting in terms of, how can people be incentivized to share this data in ways that creates more financial benefit for everyone. Challenges of data commons, engaging stakeholders in that way, et cetera. Data marketplaces, as I mentioned, extending that value to actually, liquid markets for buying and selling that have their own issues with, compliance, sourcing the data, making sure it's a quality assured, making sure that, it is more private and secure than centralized servers, while also being, actually accessible and usable to people. There's an example that is pretty cool of, that I guess incorporates both parts of this, called Molecule, which is a research research platform for academics, researchers, scientists, et cetera, to share data and then, coalesce and pool it into data marketplaces so that, it's able to be shared among universities, academic institutions, private, startups, for example, like a healthcare startup that might be interested. So that kind of shows the two sides of this. And finally leads to the legal integration, I think, or one of the most important parts, which is data trust. So, as we talk about how to manage these commons and figure out, who actually will make money from these marketplaces, who, makes decisions about where the data actually can be used, and these other kind of access management issues, then data trust are being explored as a legal form, I guess pioneered in the UK, but also in the US and across Europe for actually creating, actually creating a fiduciary duty structure to where, instead of the data just kind of, being flowing in this commons, and it actually has a trustee that's able to make decisions based on a duty of care to, managing this asset itself, but also to the individuals involved in the organization. So these stakeholders can include, people who provide the data, organizations that help with actually making the operational support and, making this make sense to people who are actually accessing it, governments who have an incentive to make sure that, in terms of antitrust, but also in terms of, kind of appropriate use of, this intimate details about people is regulated. And finally, here's a picture of the whole ecosystem, going back to kind of what I started with at the beginning about how is, these different ways of organizing around data and extracting value from it connected in an ecosystem. So, you can see the data is collected from the environment. It flows into a data trust where it's protected by a trustee and processed by staff and users. And then finally, flows out to people who are accessing it. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Beth. Please stay on the stage for 1 second. I think our audience would really like to just have an answer to this one question, where you were at the hackathon and worked with a team from a law firm. Yes. Can you shine a light just very briefly on what was the challenge and how could you solve it? It was about the M&A.
They actually ended up having a different use case, but
Okay.
what they did was super cool. And I know some of the team members are actually here, so maybe you could also join me in kind of talking about what you guys did. I just saw you. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because they did a fantastic presentation last night, and I think he could explain it much better than me.
Okay.
Hi.
2 sentences.
I'm Boris, and what we were building on the Ocean protocol was a marketplace for legal recruiting. So people could kind of offer their data to law firms that they might be interested in being recruited. And we had a bidding algorithm also, so solving the problem for law firms looking for like new recruits, and solving the problem for the people that get contacted by recruiters that they don't have any interesting offers for them.
Very interesting. Thank you very, very much. Big applause for Beth and Boris.